All right, folks, Yishai Fleischer here. Today we're going to be talking about Konstantin Kisin. He is the co-host of the Triggernometry podcast and YouTube page. They have 1.1 million followers over there. Maybe I'll get there one day as well. Konstantin is a comedian, a thinker, a writer. He was born in Russia, raised in the UK. He's a thoughtful person, and for a while he was not sure who to back, which side to support in the October 7th war. And he came to a conclusion finally after thinking it through, squarely on the side of the Jewish state Israel. Let's take a look at how Konstantin is thinking about this, because that's exactly what he did. He led us into his thoughts, the logic, what he calls first principles about how to think about these issues. Let's see if we agree or disagree or what we can learn from Konstantin. Here we go.
First, the easiest way to understand a complicated problem is to find a comparable situation about which you already know what to think. For example, if we accept that October 7th was a terrorist attack, as I believe most people do, the obvious approach would be to compare it to other terrorist attacks in recent history. That, as it happens, is impossible, because on a proportionate basis, the Western world has never experienced an attack on this scale. If we take 9/11, the most impactful terrorist attack in living memory, which shook the world's dominant superpower to its very core, we see that 2,977 people were killed in a country of 285 million people. On October 7th, approximately 1,200 people were killed in a country of just 9 million people. Some keep calling October 7th Israel's 9/11. That isn't remotely true. If October 7th was Israel 9/11, on a per capita basis, only 100 people would have been killed. In other words, October 7th was at least 12 times as bad as 9/11. And that's before accounting for the fact that Hamas took hundreds of hostages, many of whom have been killed since. So the obvious question is, if thousands of armed Mexicans had penetrated the southern border of the United States, killed 36,000 Americans, and dragged off thousands of hostages, how would America have reacted? Would there still be a Mexico to speak of? Whatever your view of the history of this conflict, I believe the logic of this is impenetrable.
What he's saying is the logic of fighting against Hamas and making a big war against Gaza is rational, is reasonable. They did a massive attack on us. It was maybe numerically, percentage-wise, not comparable to 9/11, but it was like that. It was a big, dramatic attack, and America launched into its war. We're not going to compare it exactly to that, but Israel had every right to defend itself from that heinous attack. Now, Konstantin is going to go into the anti-Israel logic and see if he could defeat it.
However, there are some persuasive arguments from the anti-Israel camp which are aimed at contextualizing October 7th. Let's look at them. Number one, history did not start on October 7th. The crux of this argument, when broken down to its central premise, is that the state of Israel is illegitimate. In this conception, Israel was created because land belonging to Palestinians was taken by Western powers and given to European Jews fleeing the Holocaust. Palestinians were not consulted, did not give consent, and found themselves kicked out of their homes. Israel is a settler colonial state. 2. October 7th was a response to Israeli brutality and oppression. Those of you who watched my debate with Safety Amos will recall that he made this argument repeatedly. The people of Gaza and the West Bank are treated so badly, he argued, the response we saw on October 7th was totally understandable. An act of resistance aimed at redressing the wrongs they have suffered. 3. Israel is killing civilians. The scenes of parents pulling their children out of rubble speak for themselves. 4. Israel is engaged in indiscriminate attacks, which is why so many innocent people are dying. This argument aims to prove that Israel is the bad guy in this war because it is killing lots of people, either deliberately or due to a callous disregard for the lives of Palestinians. These are, to the best of my knowledge, the 4 principal arguments made by the anti-Israel side. If there are others, please let me know in the comments and I will address them in a follow-up video. Let's go through the arguments one by one, and for the sake of argument, let us accept that every point in each argument is valid and historically accurate. I know many viewers will find this objectionable, but I believe the best way to unpack this entire discussion is to take people's arguments as valid and see if they make sense. The first argument, whose central premise is that Israel is illegitimate, seems to be at the core of every debate. It feels reasonable and logical to many people to contextualize Israel's response to October 7th in this way. After all, if Israel was created through illegitimate means, it puts the discussion on an entirely different footing, doesn't it? Well, actually, no, it doesn't. Again, let's think from first principles. If we believe every pro-Palestinian claim and accept that Israel was created through the forced placement of European Jews in a foreign land by Western powers, we must look for a comparable situation in which a country was created through some form of displacement of the native population. Most of you live in such a country. The United States, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada are all the products of invasion, colonization, and brutal conquest. If you go back far enough, so is almost every other country in the world. Like it or not, Israel exists. It's home to over 9 million people. The idea that they would, could, or should accept the destruction of what is now their country is absurd. The United States government would not tolerate missile strikes and terrorist rampages from Native American reservations. Neither would any government of any country under any circumstances. Peace in the Middle East will not be achieved by attempting to undo many decades of history.
Wait. Hold on. So what Konstantin is saying here is that he admits that jihadists and pro-Palestine folks don't see Israel as legitimate. But he says, well, maybe. But even if it's not legitimate in the sense that it was created in this awful way, well, most countries were created in this awful way. And therefore, you're just going to have to accept it. Now, I understand what he's saying. I don't like it because, A, I think that Israel is legitimate, hyper-legitimate. I think it's hyper-legitimate. I think that we've had two commonwealths here. I think that we are an historic people in this land. I think that this is a tribal land that really never belonged to anybody else in a serious way. It was always a backwater of some empire, sometimes Christian, sometimes Muslim, and sometimes Roman and Byzantine. And I think that the Jews always wanted to see themselves restored as the sovereigns, as they were in the first temple and second temple. So I see ours as legitimate, okay? But moreover, what I don't like in this argument is, well, even if it's illegitimate, just accept it as is, because we all accept all these other countries as is. Well, that's not exactly good logic, because there's the world that assumes that history has stopped moving forward, but people continue to fight for their liberation. If the Iranian regime would be toppled, would you make the same argument? Look, that's the way it is. So, they took over in 79 and that's fine. No, they're an illegitimate regime and they should be toppled. If Jordan became a Palestine, I could understand that. If things change throughout the world, I could understand that. I could understand certain groups in different places around the world being like, no, we want our autonomy. For example, our friends, the Kurds, they're trying to establish a state for themselves in northern Iraq. So what if there was some kind of other process by which they were not given a state? Now they're fighting for a state. So I don't quite understand the logic here. The logic is what? That that's the way it is, so accept it. Well, the jihadists have been successful for hundreds of years. They have captured lots of land. Now this upstart Jewish state is in the middle of their region, and they're upset about it. And so they want to wipe it off the map, and they can use all kinds of arguments. But basically, the most important thing that Konstantin said, I think, there is that the enemies of Israel are not looking for a two-state solution. They're not concerned of if Israel killed civilians or didn't kill civilians. They find it illegitimate from the get-go. And that, to me, is the most important point that he made here, which is it's like they just don't want to see an Israel exist altogether. All their logical arguments that they make about civilians, about rights and equalities and two-state solutions and all kinds of stuff, that's not what they want. They want to get rid of Israel in toto. And I think that's the most important contribution that he makes there, which is to say, hey, look at it. That's what these people want. They want to destroy you. And therefore, once you realize that they just want to destroy you, you just got to hang tough and accept the fact that you have your rights and you got to defend them, even if they don't get it or if they have counter arguments. You know your truth, you know your logic, you know your right to exist. So continue to be there, and nobody's going to be able to get you off your land if you defend yourself. All right? That's how I understand point number one.
The second argument centers on the idea that October 7th was a response to Israeli occupation and brutality. This, again, seems reasonable to many people. After all, what would it take for you to behave the way Hamas did on October 7th? The problem with this argument is that what happened on October 7th was not an attempt to weaken Israel militarily. It was not an attempt to break Hamas militants out of Israeli jails. It was not an attack on the Israeli Defense Force. It was not a prison breakout, as some people like to describe it, because when people break out of a prison, they don't normally head to the nearest town and start massacring women and children. October 7th was, by design and implementation, a terrorist attack whose purpose was to slaughter civilians, terrify Israeli society, and nothing else. This was not an act of resistance. It was an act of terrorism.
Well, the word terrorism is a very broad word. Let's filter it down to the real language of this region. It was an act of jihadism. It was an act of conquest. It was an act of bullying. And it was an act of jihadism. You know it when you see it. And so, yeah, terrorism is right. But more specific, it was an Islamic terrorism called jihadism, which is something that we face around here and have faced since, the middle 600s. So we know about it and we understand it. And it was definitely, and I definitely have to agree with Konstantin, is that it was definitely not a prison breakout. It was definitely designed to terrorize Israel.
Which is why Israel had to react to it in the manner that it has, and why any other country would have done the same. The third argument is that Israel is killing civilians. This is the one claim made by the anti-Israel side that is undeniably true. However, this is an example of the emotive but irrelevant context I mentioned earlier. Civilians are always killed in war. The question is not whether they're being killed, but who bears responsibility for their deaths and who can stop the killing. Again, applying first principles thinking, we must reach for a comparable example. There is no exact equivalent that comes to mind, but there is some useful context we can consider. Hamas has repeatedly stated that given the opportunity, they will repeat the October 7th attacks again and again and again. While this may seem shocking to us in the West, it makes perfect sense given that Hamas believes Israel is illegitimate and would like to see it gone. This means that unless Israel destroys or degrades their ability to carry out their threats, it is likely to experience more terrorist attacks again and again. Does anyone seriously believe that any government of any country anywhere in the world would or could react to something like 12 9/11s in one day and the threat of more to follow as many times as possible with anything other than all-out war? And who can end the killing? Well, theoretically Israel could, of course, but for the reason we just discussed, they can't, won't, and shouldn't. That leaves Hamas, who could have returned the hostages and surrendered the people who took them. What is more, they could hide their civilians in the vast network of tunnels they've built to reduce casualties. Instead, they refuse to build bomb shelters and do everything they can to maximize civilian casualties. That's not my opinion, it's something Hamas are themselves proud of. A senior spokesman for the group, Sami Abu Zuhri, gave an interview on Palestinian station Al-Aqsa TV the last time this conflict flared up. The policy of people confronting Israeli warplanes with their bare chests in order to protect their homes has proven effective against the occupation, he said. We in Hamas call upon our people to adopt this policy in order to protect Palestinian homes. So yes, the deaths of civilians are tragic, and in a modern world where you can fill your social media feed with gruesome footage, that tragedy can be broadcast straight into your home 24/7. But the responsibility for their deaths is entirely with Hamas, and the failure to put a stop to the killing is theirs and theirs alone.
Excellent points here, I think. I just want to add one thing, which is I don't think that at this point, if Hamas would release all the hostages, the war would stop. The war has to stop now when Israel completely destroys, vanquishes, and eliminates Hamas from the scene, and in general, jihadism. And by the way, Hamas may be on the run and decimated in Gaza, but in Judea and Samaria, not far from where I'm sitting right now, Hamas is still plenty strong with tons of arms and tons of jihadism that they have taught, and they are still very much the spirit behind some of the towns around here, around the Hebron area for sure. And so Hamas is far from being done, and Israel should be far from being done with this war. We have to continue this war in order to root them out. We have to use this opportunity to root out, for the sake of our children, for the sake of their children. We have to root out Hamas in totality down in Gaza and also in Judea and Samaria and other towns where they have taken root.
Which brings us to the final argument. Israel's attacks are indiscriminate and designed to inflict civilian casualties. This is actually the simplest argument of the four to address because it is an empirical matter. The war in Gaza is not the first conflict in human history. We can compare the ratio of combatant to civilian deaths in this war to others. What happens when we do? Historically, urban warfare operations result in a casualty ratio of 9 civilians for every 1 enemy fighter killed. In Gaza, it is 2 to 1. In other words, despite the deliberate attempts by Hamas to increase the number of civilian casualties, Israel has been extraordinarily successful in reducing them. This doesn't mean that there won't be incidents in which innocent Palestinians are killed, and, as in any war, there will likely be war crimes committed by both sides. But overall, the numbers don't lie. If you need further evidence that claims of Israel's indiscriminate attacks are nonsense, just look at the way various commentators reacted to what has been dubbed Operation Grim Reaper. Thousands of Hezbollah pages were rigged with explosives and then detonated simultaneously, killing and injuring thousands of terrorists and a small number of bystanders. The pages in question were not picked at random. Israel specifically selected a batch of senior Hezbollah operatives. And still, people like Hamza Yusuf, Scotland's former First Minister, complain about Israel's indiscriminate attacks. This was definitionally the most precise, targeted and surgical large-scale anti-terrorist operation in human history.
So Israel tries very hard not to kill civilians. That's the bottom line. It's true. It's true. We really do try to minimize the death of folks who are non-combatants. It's important to say that the civilian population, on the one hand, many today reject Hamas. On the other hand, many supported them in a societal way and voted for them and were cheering on the October 7th massacre and were part of it, even if they were civilians. It's important to say that because some of the civilians that are being killed are part of they're actually combatants. They're not actually civilians, even though they, can dress up as civilians or seem like civilians, but they are really part of the support network of Hamas as well. So it's important to understand that. But the bottom line, Kisin, in a very cold and cutting fashion, is saying, look, Israel tries to minimize civilian casualties, and that is a numerical fact.
In summary, I've engaged with an open mind and in good faith with all the anti-Israel arguments presented to me over the last year. On balance, I regard them as disingenuous, irrelevant, and designed to pull at my heartstrings in order to obscure the harsh reality of this conflict. We would respond exactly the way that Israel has. The only difference is we would do so with the support of every member of the international community, while Israel has to fight not only the terrorists who want to wipe them off the map, but Western apologists for those terrorists as well. If you enjoy these videos, you should know that they're available on my Substack weeks, sometimes months ahead of time.
Well, they do a great job, Konstantin, Kisin, and Triggernometry. You could definitely check out their work on YouTube and in other places on Substack. Good for them. I think that the bottom line is that Konstantin is identifying that Western apologists, folks that talk about other issues that have to do with this conflict, but not the core issue, which is that Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, and jihadism in general wants to see Israel wiped off the map. That is their goal. And they're doing it in smart ways. They understand that it's got to be piece by piece. They liberated chunks of land by getting Gaza, by getting South Lebanon, and then arming them to the teeth. And they're here to destroy Israel in toto. The minute that they make these attacks, they have the Western apologists defend the jihad by saying, no, this is not jihad. They just want liberation. They just want freedom. They're in an open air prison. They want a 2-state solution. They just want equal rights, all kinds of stuff like that, which sound good to Western ears, but in fact cover up in a thin veil of human rights and liberalism and progressivism. But at the end, it's actually jihadism, and they want to destroy Israel. It's not about the children of Gaza. That's part of the veil. They want to see Israel destroyed, and that is what's behind it. And if you start analyzing things and words with that consciousness, with the realization that what they want to do is destroy Israel, you'll start to hear it. You'll start to hear it, and it becomes more self-evident. You start to ask a question, and you see that it's really not about living with the Jews. It's not about fixing a problem of equalities. It's not about providing more food. It's not about protecting more children. It's about destroying Israel in toto. They hate it. They hate Israel. Why do they hate Israel? Maybe they're jealous of Israel. Maybe they don't want to see a shiny Jewish state in the middle of the Arab region. Maybe they don't like what Israel stands for, which is God and family and values. Maybe they're just progressive and don't like, those biblical rules and biblical ideals. There's many reasons that people hate Israel. There's also just plain old anti-Semitism, which is something deep. There are many reasons why people hate Israel, and they use the language of human rights as a cudgel with which to strike Israel, or as license, as a rationale to explain why they hate Israel in the first place and why they have now a right to attack Israel. Konstantin did a great job there. And I think there's also a lot more about the legitimacy of Israel, about our history, about our rights, and about God, and about actually a better future for this region. Check out Triggernometry and Konstantin Kisin. Thank you so much for being with us today. And of course, check out ways to be part of our movement. The first one is very simple, which is fight for Israel. You got to fight for Israel. So if you believe in that little slogan, fightforisrael.org is a great way to support various ways that we are building up the land of Israel, sending Torah to the world, educating, broadcasting, and fighting for Israel in multiple ways that are impactful. If you love our broadcasting here at Yishai Fleischer TV, check out buymeacoffee.com/Yishai. It's a great way to make a sweet support donation through caffeinating our team spiritually. It's a spiritual kind of coffee. That's buymeacoffee.com/Yishai. But your support is very real there. And finally, the Jewish community of Hebron is where I work, and it is a place where is housed the tomb of the patriarchs and matriarchs, where Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Leah are buried, and where Jewish community has existed for almost 4,000 years, protecting this amazing holy site, which is one of the epicenters of the book of Genesis. If you love the book of Genesis, check out hebronfund.org, learn about our town, learn about what we do, and check out opportunities to support as well. That's it, folks. I want to wish you blessings, and I want more people to hear straight logic and get that courage. Konstantin comes from cold logic, but the thing that I recommend to everybody is the posture of moral clarity, of knowing the truth, of loving God and the Bible, loving Israel because Israel is a good force in this world. That posture, that'll help you get through any of the intellectual challenges that they throw at you. God bless you, folks, wherever you are. Lots of love and shalom.